Good morning, everybody, and I'm back with this week's installment of the Clemon Corner, and let's get right into it. Perhaps the biggest news in the sports world this week had nothing to do, well, had something to do with the sports league, but the other individual involved was not an athlete. Jay-Z and his announced partnership with the NFL that has two prongs to it. It's going to involve, on one hand, Rock Nation is going to advise on the selection of artists for events um, for the NFL. So, tent side events that they're having, say, at the Pro Bowl. Rock Nation would be responsible for identifying talent and promoting and booking. So, that's a coup for them on that side. The more complicated and interesting side, and the side that relates to what I'm ultimately going to talk about, is that Jay-Z is going to help enhance the NFL's ongoing efforts towards social justice reform through their platform, Inspire Change. And its focus is on education, economic advancement, criminal justice reform, as well as improving law enforcement's relationship with its local communities. So this is fascinating because Jay-Z, up until this week, has claimed loyalty to Colin Kaepernick and his ongoing protest to bring attention to social justice issues, which in fact is the reason why the NFL ended up coming up with this Inspired Change platform. So, in seemingly a 180, Jay-Z has done an about face and has aligned himself with the NFL. And so, what I really want to talk about is the implications for Colin Kaepernick here. Which, again, there's so many layers to this onion appeal. I don't have that kind of time, so I'm just going to get into some of more of the athlete development related components to it. Um, so ultimately, at the end of the day, I feel as though the NFL has used Jay-Z to do an end run around Colin Kaepernick. His former teammate and compatriot from a protesting standpoint, Eric Reed, who now plays for the Panthers, has said that Jay-Z effectively has helped the NFL to bury Colin Kaepernick's career by virtue of this move that was made this week. I don't tend to disagree. At the end of the day, Jay-Z has been, is, and will always be a capitalist first and everything else second. So on that level, none of us should really be surprised. Um, but here we have Colin Kaepernick, who's probably very surprised. So let's talk about um, what this means for Colin Kaepernick. Let me start off by saying I don't think he ever anticipated that when he started taking knees during the preseason games of this 2016-17 season. I don't think he anticipated that things would be where they are today in August of 2019. And so it's tough to say. I support Colin Kaepernick and the causes that he has urged people to get behind. At the same time, from an athlete development standpoint, there were some missed opportunities along the way for him. For one, I think it begs ultimately the question: what happens when you don't own and control your own narrative? And going back to Jay-Z for a second, I mean, essentially, Jay-Z has taken Colin Kaepernick's voice when it comes to the social justice piece, as far as from the NFL standpoint. Jay-Z has this song called The Takeover. He goes at a number of rappers and rap groups, Nas most notably, and also Mobb Deep. And one of the lines in which he gets at Nas, he says, "Yeah, I sampled your voice. You are using it wrong." So effectively, that's what Jay has done to Cap. He sampled his voice. He took his voice because he was using it wrong. Um, like I said, I don't think that Colin Kaepernick quite knew what to expect when he got into this thing 3 years ago. And so that's, the first takeaway for me is it's important as athletes going into social activism, especially the type that Kaepernick engaged in, do your homework. Try to do some forecasting around the activity that you're contemplating. Use your resources to try to gauge what the reaction might be. Now, granted, from a political standpoint, um, the dynamic and landscape of the country changed in November of 2016 in a way that really took this in a way that some components of this have been completely foreseeable. But there are some foreseeable parts. And perhaps there was an opportunity for Kaepernick to do more homework around that. And just as important is to know your end game. I've been saying for a couple of years now, as a fan and supporter of Kaepernick, I haven't felt like he has communicated to us, his fan base, what we can do to support him, what he feels we can do to support him. I think we have presumed, and not necessarily erroneously, but we've been assuming what it is that he wants to see from us in the way of support. He's not articulated that. And I think that's been in part because he hasn't known, or he didn't know from the outset what his end game was. So it's hard for him to tell us how we can help, other than, say, donating to the causes that he's deemed in alignment with what he's trying to accomplish. Um, you also need to prepare for the financial consequences of whatever it is you're going to do. It's not clear to me what his financial situation is. I'm assuming he is not struggling. That is an assumption, but I'm assuming he's not struggling, and he's taking care of that part of his life. This is again a fascinating situation. The NFL has brilliantly and in this very Machiavellian kind of way worked around Colin Kaepernick and the protest issue by um, using Jay-Z as a kind of a stand-in and giving and conferring the authority upon Jay-Z that you might have hoped that they would have ultimately conferred upon Kaepernick, at least in the way of a conversation. Um, Jay-Z talked about these actionable items that he's, we're past where Jay-Z has declared, not Colin Kaepernick, Jay-Z has declared we're past kneeling and we're moving on to actionable items. And between Jay-Z and Kaepernick, certainly it seems that the most appropriate person to be declaring those things would be Colin Kaepernick. But again, going back to not controlling your narrative, not having clarity around your end game, and not being able to articulate to your supporters and stakeholders what it is you need in the way of support from them. Well, we're going to continue to keep our eyes on this. There's some speculation now that this may be Jay's pipeline and path to majority ownership of an NFL team. I think ultimately, when this all bottoms out, Jay will have absolutely benefited from, as a capitalist, from this arrangement. And there's a reason to be excited for him as a black businessman in that space. However, I'm taking a wait and see approach as far as what he does on this social justice piece. And I understand that he did not confer with Colin Kaepernick before striking the deal. It sounds as though he did communicate with him afterwards. And there's some reporting out, I think primarily by Jamel Hill, that conversation didn't go well, and that Kaepernick was at a minimum disappointed that the deal had been made, and especially without Kaepernick's input or knowledge. So we'll see what happens. I can't say that I'm cautiously optimistic that this is going to move the needle from a social justice standpoint. Whom Jay-Z brings to the table will say a lot. There are organizations and there are folks doing the work at the ground level. Let's see if he brings them. And if he doesn't, then I think that's going to speak volumes as far as the future of the NFL's initiatives around social justice. But we're going to keep our eye on Colin Kaepernick too. He's still trying to get put on with the team. There's some speculation that if Jay-Z does own a team, that he'll put Kaepernick on. We'll see about that. I'm not really jumping on that bandwagon just yet. But let's see what happens to Colin Kaepernick. I thought as of 2 years ago his career was done in the NFL just because of what had happened in that first year of protest. I'm not particularly in a meaningfully different space today, especially with the deal that Jay-Z has struck. But we're going to, again, keep an eye on it, and we will see you next week.